Hello, and welcome to the College Football Breakdown Show. These are the DFS picks for Week 15 of college football. Not a very good slate we have here, but we're going to cover it. This is for the DraftKings main slate. This week kind of sucked in college football. The stupid way they handle college football where the ending doesn't really matter until you begin playoffs and whatnot, but not many meaningful games to go over here, so not a super thrilling slate, but there is always money to be made anytime there's a slate with college football, or college basketball for that matter. College sports are the best for DFS. You have the biggest edge, in my opinion. Anyway, if you are new here, if you haven't watched before, I do not play 150 lineups. I play a lot of lineups, though, and I obsess over it, and that's half of my life is covering this, so I hope this information will help you. I'm covering it anyway and figured I would share just free information for you. It is sponsored by thebreakdownsports.com. Link to our Twitter down below. I will have a DFS article coming out. I will be writing that after this video, so I'm going to be up late tonight. But anyway, so I will link that down below. Follow me on Twitter at YonkersCFB. I share my thoughts there, and I will post the article there as well. If you don't play college football very often, something you should know, try to say it every week, don't play too heavy if you don't plan on being there, and you don't plan on being able to check the news obsessively before kick. If you're not following Twitter, if you don't have the beat writers there, if you're not following other college football people, not following the news on your players, especially if you have reason to be concerned. Even if you don't have reason to be concerned, sometimes we don't find out until after kick with the COVID issues and whatnot. So as long as you are on top of it, then you're good. But it's quite different than other sports. Okay, let's get straight to it. First on the slate, we have Georgia versus Missouri. I did bet Georgia minus 13 in this game. I think Missouri's not as good as they've looked in some games. I think they're kind of fool's gold. Last I checked, they had their football teams at about 59 available scholarship players for this game. They're dealing with some troubles. They've had some opt-outs. Their defense has been okay, but they allowed 50 points to Arkansas last week with their backup quarterback in, KJ Jefferson. Allowed 566 yards in that one. They should be without their two top corners in this one, and they may be losing two other defensive starters as well. So I will have some Georgia ownership, and I will bet Georgia. Georgia's looking better with JT Daniels at quarterback. As far as playing Daniels, he's decent, but the price is $8,200. I think that's right. So he's fine. I'm more going to be looking at having a wide receiver here or there, and possibly Zamir White, their running back, at $6,800. I think that's a decent price in a slate. So the running back slate, I haven't been paying up for running backs pretty much at all lately. My top scoring lineup last week, I should have played it in the main. I just played it in a low entry single entry, which is usually where I have the most success, by the way. That's usually the kind of player I am, and I've just consistently, year over year, had success in those single entry tournaments. I usually play kind of low level. Don't shame me. But anyway, I've had some consistent success, and my best lineup last week had Trey Sermon at running back and Chris Tyree at running back. I think at 3,500 and 3,200, and that was my highest scoring lineup. So I've been paying down at running back. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that this week. I know I probably won't be paying all the way up at the top because I haven't done that in a while, and I've had a lot of success over the last couple weeks. Anyway, so Zamir White at 6,800. I think he's in that range where I might consider him. He does have 20 plus DraftKings points in 2 of his last 3 games. They do have 2 weeks off, which I think will help with this game. Their offense is going to continue to look better. Zamir White does not see the typical carries we would like to see for a star running back, but that's why we're getting a little bit of a price discount with him. You can see the carries there. There's opportunity. A decent matchup, like I said. I think the Missouri defense, while they are solid, I think they're taking a significant step down. As far as the wide receivers, I actually do think they are appropriately priced, which is the first time in a few weeks, so I don't love it. We were getting Pickens and Burton at a discount there. But now Pickens at $6,400, that's a fair price. I'm not sure how much I'll have of him, just because, like people like De'Ami Brown are only $200 cheaper. Burton at $5,600, I think he's going to be my most owned guy in this offense. And then Jackson at $5,300, I guess is decent. I don't know how much I'll have there. As far as targets, Burton has 15 in the last 2 weeks, and Pickens has 14, whereas Jackson only has 9. So I think Burton is more, he could have a big game. We saw that huge game 2 weeks ago. I think Pickens is a safer play, so in tournaments, I'll probably go to Burton. As far as Missouri, they supposedly have the 33rd best offense in the country. They run the ball for 4.1 yards per carry, which is decent. They like to dink and dunk the ball a lot, so not something I am usually very interested in, especially when they're playing a defense that is the 23rd best in total yardage. They only allow 75 rush yards at 2.4 yards per carry, so I don't think Missouri is going to have much success running the ball here. I think Roundtree's too expensive. I do think Tyler Batty, their backup running back, he does get significant work, and he does catch a lot of balls as well. So where this Missouri offense, where they've scored 91 points in their last 2 games, sure, that looks good. Sure, they're decent. But, I think the Georgia defense is getting a little bit healthier and a little bit better, so I'm not really going to have much ownership. I think the quarterback of 5,700, there are a lot of punt play options at quarterback. I think you could do worse than a guy who's going to dink and dunk and be from behind, but we've seen even when they score 48 points, they only had 16 points, so I really don't know what the upside is there, so I'm not really going to have any. As far as the wide receivers, I might have one here and there. Chisholm has double digits in 4 straight games, double-digit DraftKings points, and he's seen 19 targets in his last 2 games. So at 4,700, it's not a great matchup, but I do think he's too cheap, and they're going to be playing from behind. Hazelton's their next guy who's next up. There was some weird stuff going on there. I thought he was going to leave the program for a second, but now he's back. He saw 6 targets last game, and he probably has a little bit, probably the most touchdown upside of anybody on this offense here. All right, moving along. Oklahoma, West Virginia is canceled. Looks like DraftKings hasn't updated that, so all my notes here, waste of time. That's okay. Skipping over. The Washington-Oregon game was canceled as well. Let's see if DraftKings has that one. No, DraftKings still has that. So those 2 should be showing by canceled in the morning, I would guess. Probably East Coast people. Lazy. Already asleep. Or this is their drinking hours. Anyway, okay, Rutgers versus Maryland. This is a sneaky game. There might be some offense in this one. It's ugly. It's ugly probably for a reason. You might get ownership, some ownership leverage in this one if you're into that. I usually don't look that much into it in college football just because if I know I have a lineup that's going to score 200 plus with possible upside for 250, 260, I don't really care that much about ownership. I usually find ways, especially even in the main, I don't have crazy ownership where I'm not worried about it. It's the way it works out in college. With a few games being canceled, sometimes I think about that a little more, and I do like mentioning it for our viewers who do look into that and play more lineups than I do. Anyway, so on offense for Rutgers, let's look at the defenses. Maryland's defense is allowing 442 yards per game, whereas Rutgers is allowing 427 yards per game. So both offenses could move the ball. Maryland's rush defense is really what I think the weakness is here. They're allowing 228 rush yards per game at 4.9 yards per carry, so that's mostly where I'm going to be looking. Pacheco, their running back, he sees a very inconsistent workload. He does have 20 plus fantasy points in 4 of his last 7 games, but you can see right there he only had 5 carries in the last game. I think that's a little bit more of a blip on the radar. I do not think Maryland's that good. I did bet Rutgers plus 7.5 just because these are 2 bad teams with 2 bad defenses. Anything can happen. I don't see why Maryland should be favored by over a touchdown to anybody. But so I think Pacheco at 4.5. If I'm paying down at running back, which I've been doing lately, I'll probably have some Pacheco. As far as at quarterback, Noah Vedral, I mean, he has some rushing ability, so I think you could do worse. He has a little bit more upside. He had 30 points in that Michigan game, but really hasn't done anything aside from that. I don't think he's a great quarterback, so not super interested, but I think you could do a lot worse if you're punting. Bo Melton does have 20 plus DraftKings points, or sorry, it was Melton who had 20 plus DraftKings points in 4 of his last 7. That was not Pacheco, but you saw there when we're looking at Pacheco's game log, he is decent. I do think he's one of the better talents. Him and Melton, I think, are the 2 best players on this offense. So they're the 2 I would look to, but Melton's price is just insane. I'm not sure I'm going to pay up there. I guess if you're trying to go for some leverage, you could, because he's their clear top option. Other than that, I think I will have some ownership paying way down for Shameem Jones at 3.4. He has 7 targets, 10 targets, 8 targets, 3 targets in his last 4 games. So not great with the 3 targets, but we can see he's been kind of a decent threat in this offense. We saw what he did the 2 games before that, Penn State, where you can see him and Pacheco both didn't have great games, but with those DraftKings points, I think he should be one of the more popular pay down options. I will definitely have some of them. I've only set a few lineups so far, and he was in one of them. I don't hate that at all. Looking at Maryland, I feel like Maryland could have a big day here. I don't want to go crazy on them because they're a little bit of an ugly team. But, Tua's a little bit more expensive. Not Tua. Baby Tua. But he has some rushing ability. I would like to see a little bit more. And he's been very, very, very inconsistent. He's had some bad games, and he's had some very good ones. So I think he's priced appropriately. I think there's better options in that range. I like Jordan Travis of FSU more, but he's decent, especially if you're going for a leverage stack. I think Demas at 6.1, I will have some of Demas. He has 20-plus DraftKings points in 3 straight games, and he's done that against some good teams. Last week, Raheem Jarrett was out, their second best wide receiver, and Demas had 14 targets. So especially if Jarrett's sitting, I will have a decent amount of Demas. But I'm not sure what's going on with Jarrett. It sounds like he was on the field but only saw 1 target. So who knows what's going on. I still think Demas is fine. Other than that, it sounds like Jayshon Jones at 4.4 is back. He does not see very many targets when he is on the field, but he's always a home run threat. So you could do worse, but I don't love it. I think the prices are appropriate. Okay, moving on. Wake versus Louisville. This one, I'll have some ownership interest in this one for sure. Wake plays with the 14th highest pace in college football. They average 75.9 plays per game. I am surprised to see they only have 3.9 yards per carry because they run the ball a lot. And every time I watch them, they're running the ball effectively, but apparently only 3.9 yards per carry. Big news here is that their running back, Kenneth Walker III, has opted out for the season. That's why he's at 3,000. So Beal Smith at 6.6, I will definitely have some ownership in him. He has 336 yards over his last 3 games, and that's while splitting reps with Walker. Now he has the backfield to himself. I would imagine one of these guys behind him, Ellison or Droddy, probably sees some carries. But I just figure why not go for Beal Smith if you're going for it. They are facing a Louisville defense, allowing 5.9 yards per play. Not good. So the 370 yards per game they're allowing is a little bit of a lie, and you can beat them on the ground. They're allowing 185 rush yards per game at a 4.8 yards per carry clip. I'm interested in a lot of spots in this game, so I think Beal Smith will be my most owned player in this game, but I will also have some of the receiving game as well. Robertson has 26.48 DraftKings points average over his last 4. There are 300-plus yard games in there. He has 8 catches. 8 catches per game in that span. He saw 16 targets last game as well. So I think he's their clear top option at 6.7. You have to pay up a little bit, but I do think that's granted. I think Green, I've been trying to play Green this year, and I just haven't really chosen the right spots. I'll probably have some of them here, again, at 5.6. He did see 19 targets over his last 2 games, and he is a talented player. As far as the quarterback, anyone below them, I think Morin at 3.9 might be a little cheap, but he's very, very inconsistent. Perry's more of an outside guy at 3.2. I mean, you're really just flipping a coin, which I'm not super interested in doing. I think Morin at 3.9, if I'm paying down, I would just go to Morin. Anyway, Sam Hartman has not thrown an interception yet this year. I think I got that right. And he's averaging 8.6 yards per attempt on the season. They haven't really needed to throw the ball because this week's team's been pretty good. 6.8, I think he's too cheap. I will have some Sam Hartman once again. He's finally started throwing the ball, and in one of those games, he had 44 points. Some nice stacks that week. But this Wake team, they haven't played in forever. Who knows if they're going to come out rusty. This is kind of a weird game. That's the reason I'm not hammering this over at about 63, but it is pretty good total. You're going to want some ownership in this one. As far as Louisville, they're going against the Wake Forest defense. That's number 108 in total yards per game at 457 allowed. That's at a 6.1 yards per play clip. Not very good. They are worse against the pass, allowing 275 yards per game. I think Mikael Cunningham, the quarterback, I like him, but I don't know if I love the price. The volume is not fantastic, but he has seen a nice rushing boost, which is why I might pay up for him in some lineups because Since Javian Hawkins, their star running back, opted out, in those 3 games he's been out, Cunningham has really taken off running the ball. He has 46 carries for 351 yards and 3 touchdowns in those 3 games. So I think I have to look to him a little bit. I'll also have a decent amount of ownership interest. Their top wide receiver, Tutu Atwell, is opted out, so I think Dez Fitzpatrick at 5.8K will be in some of my lineups. Last game, he had 8 catches for 182 yards and 1 touchdown. He started the season very slow after a pretty nice year last year, and really the concern with him was the volume in an offense that the main concern for everyone except Javian Hawkins was the volume. I think the volume's changed now. I think we have to really rethink this Louisville offense just a little bit since Hawkins isn't the clear bell cow anymore. He's not there, and Atwell's not there. So I think Dez Fitzpatrick's a fine play. Other than that, I think Smith is too cheap. Braden Smith, he should see a bump without Atwell out. He's a boomer bust guy. He doesn't have a touchdown yet this year, but he's kind of a speedster, and he should be on the field. So he's okay. They started playing this guy Watkins, so that's something to monitor. I believe he's a freshman. He had 4 receptions for 34 yards in that Syracuse game. I know I was watching that game. I think it was on a Thursday or a Friday. I'm like, why the hell is this Watkins guy on the field so much? And he looks pretty good, so who knows if he's going to be on the field again. I would imagine he would be with Atwell out. So I think at 3,000, if you really need somebody, you could definitely do worse. Having not seen another 3,000 guy I like, he's my favorite mid-price guy on the slate, I'll say. As far as betting-wise, I would definitely bet Wake if this was a normal game, but they haven't played a game in a month. Wake is 5-0 against the spread in their last 5, while Louisville has been very bad. They're 2-5 against the spread on the year, or in their last 7, rather. Louisville's, the over has hit in 11 of the last 15, so I would be on Wake and I would be on the over if they hadn't played in a month. That just makes it so wishy-washy with the Satterfield weird stuff going on in that Louisville program. Not sure how to feel about that one. Oh, the Louisville backfield. Hassan Hall, man, at 4.1K, like I'm tempted to go back to him. I thought he would take over. He was a number 2 guy last year, and he seemed talented. And he was, I believe, he's an Oklahoma transfer. Might have that wrong. And he was the number 2 guy. Looked good at the beginning of the year. He had something going on with his family. I'm not exactly sure what it was. Some personal matters, and he took some time away from the team. And then he came back. So when he came back and he didn't get many carries in that first game, that's understandable. It seems like he probably wasn't practicing. And then in the Boston College game, he still only had 7 carries, whereas Mitchell saw 10 carries. So I think they're still going to be splitting reps. Can't really see justified hang up for Mitchell. I guess you could do worse in a game where anybody's a decent target, but Hassan Hall is the one I'm monitoring. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull the trigger since he's kind of burned me his last 2 games. He's a decent pass catching back as well. Okay. Alabama versus Arkansas. You all know Alabama by now. They're averaging 49.2 points per game. It's actually more than 10 points higher than any of their other championship teams. So amazingly explosive. I'm not really sure I can pay up for Mac Jones. He's obviously fine. I have to have some Devontae Smith. Obviously at 10,000, by far the most expensive wide receiver. I think by over 2,000. I think Calvin Austin at 7.9 is the second most expensive. It's really hard to do, but I think if you're setting multiple lineups, you have to have him in there in some. Every time I faded him, I felt like an idiot, so it was nice to have a couple shares in his last game where he went bananas. Anyway, in his last 4 games, he has 35 catches for 749 yards and 11 touchdowns. It's over his last 4 games. It's like a good season for most people. That's 47.2 DraftKings points per game, so hard to understate how good he's been. Other than that, John Mechie, I've been kind of going to him since he's been the cheaper option in the Alabama passing attack. It's usually what you want to look for is who's the value play. I still think Mechie's the clear number 2 guy in this offense. And while he hasn't been fantastic, he has seen 10 catches over his last 2 games, and he has seen 16 targets in that span. So I really do think he's a clear number 2 guy. I think he has breakaway speed. I'm going to have some of him. I mean, the price at 5.5 is really not bad at all. So other than that, I did play some Billingsley last week. He was very cheap, and he was good to me. He caught a touchdown. I really appreciated that. He has 9 catches for 179 yards and 2 scores over his last 3 games. So I think he's the third guy you would look to. I believe he's like a kind of a hybrid, like tight end, and plays kind of like a slot back role in the backfield. Not exactly sure what they refer to it as in Bama, but so 4.8K. I'm not sure the upside is terrific playing that role, but maybe. Slade Bolden's been kind of injured at 3.2K. He's probably too cheap if he's healthy, but the ankle, who knows if he's going to be healthy. And the tight end, Forrestal, doesn't really see enough workload at 3K. If you absolutely need a minimum price guy, he's on the field sometimes. That's about all I can say for that. Najee Harris, I mean, not much I can say about Najee Harris. 9.2K. He's a beast. I haven't really been paying up for him, and I haven't missed it that much, but I'm not going to talk you off him. I've been playing Robinson a little bit. I played him in the night slate last week, and he didn't really come through for me, but at such a cheap price, getting 11 carries, I'd love to see that. In a game they're favored by 32, maybe. I think he's fine if you really need a cheap guy. I would say I kind of like Arkansas on the spread this year. I don't really think Nick Saban's going to look to embarrass them, unlike some other games, and there's really no reason for them to blow them out. They're already a lock for the playoff, pretty much, as long as they beat Florida. But even if they lose to Florida, they're probably still a lock. So I'm not really sure how much they're playing for here, which means I won't have a ton of Alabama, but I still have to have some because, like I said, they're averaging 50 points. Okay, anyway. Arkansas. Oh, worth noting, Arkansas, their defense, they might be without their middle linebacker, who has 111 tackles this year, left in the third quarter last game and didn't return. So, all right, anyway, Arkansas on offense. I've played some Arkansas this year, and they've been pretty good, and they've always had cheap prices, which has been great. Franks has completed 68% of his passes for 8.8 yards per attempt and only has 4 interceptions on this year. He's been a very pleasant surprise, and we don't know if he's going to play. Sounds like he's been practicing, but there are a lot of rumors in Arkansas. Maybe they're looking towards the future, and maybe they're just going to look to play this KJ Jefferson guy, who was really pretty good last week. I'm not really sure I can play them here. While I do love the price, Alabama has held its last 5 opponents to 17 points or fewer, allowing just 5 touchdowns during that stretch. So I'm not really sure what the upside is. I could definitely see a world where Arkansas scores 17 points here, but I'd be pretty surprised if they scored anything above that. So, which means I would have no interest in the running backs. Jalen Smith, too expensive going against Alabama. He did see like 26 carries last game, but I mean, come on. I had to talk myself off having some Traylon Burks shares because he has been an absolute monster. Saw 15 targets last game. So I know it's not a great matchup, probably going against Patrick Surtain and the rest of his Alabama secondary, but holy Toledo, he is a monster. So maybe I'll have a share or two. Probably shouldn't play too much of anybody going against Alabama. Mike Woods at 4.5, I guess you could make a case for him. He does have double-digit DraftKings points in 4 straight games. Weird because he's only seen 11 catches in that span. He's the ultimate deep play guy, and obviously a tough matchup, but they will be playing from behind and throwing the ball, I would imagine. Navy versus Army. I'm going to skip that game. I love watching this. I wish they were playing on a day where nobody else was playing so I could devote all my attention to it. Love watching it. But just pure aesthetics alone and just the love of football, it just is nice, you know. Especially for a guy who's obsessed with playing DraftKings and DFS and all these numbers and everything. It's just nice to watch an old school football game and relax every now and then. It's like a part of the holidays. It's great. But we're talking about DFS, so enough of that soapbox. If you absolutely have to go to anybody, I think where I would go is at the quarterback for Army. They haven't said who's starting, so huge risk, but if you get word, which you probably won't, Tyler, dangerously close to Tyler. At 5.8K, this guy was the quarterback last game, and he looked decent. He had 35 rushing attempts for 121 yards. Lost 3 fumbles, though. Oops. My goodness. Anyway, the total is at like 37, so. Coastal Carolina versus Troy. Coastal obviously coming off that massive win against BYU. Pretty cool ending there. I enjoyed that game. I enjoyed the fourth quarter immensely. Anyway, definitely possibly a letdown spot. So I'm not going to have much ownership interest in this game at all. I think I will have some one-offs here and there, however, so I will cover these players. Troy is a perfectly average football team, which is weird to me because they've had some good teams in the past. They are averaging 26.3 points per game, and they're giving up 26.5 points per game. So like perfectly average. Their defense is perfectly middle of the road in pretty much every aspect. So I'm not going to have much interest in Coastal. Their quarterback, Grayson McCall, hasn't attempted over 30 pass attempts yet this year, by my count, unless I missed a game. But he is kind of a dual threat, and this offense is pretty good at 8.3, but I just think in a slate where there's enough games, you can get to other people. I'm not really sure. I love that. Maribel has 15 DraftKings points in all of his recent games that you go check. He has 30 plus in each of his last 2 games. My worry here would be, what are they playing for? I am worried about this Coastal team's motivation where they're just kind of trying to get by. They're trying to get a W and then trying to move on for a good reason. They've really been bitching to the media. It's really been off-putting, checking the quotes they've been giving their head coach Chadwell in the media. We have to play Troy, and they had COVID, and they're the reason our game got canceled, and they're just really bitching and moaning about having to play this game. So it's really thrown me off. I do like this Coastal program. I enjoy them, but it's been very off-putting, and it really doesn't make me want to play many of their players. Very different from Lincoln Riley, whose game just got canceled, but when they had to play the makeup game against West Virginia, same situation. Game was postponed due to the other team, and he was just talking about how glad he is to play football, and Chadwell's bitching that he has to play more football. So I don't really love to see that in a game where I'm just happy to watch any football that I can. Anyway, at the wide receiver position, nobody really sees consistent targets. Hiley sees the most targets. He had a bagel last game out, so it's hard to justify paying for a bagel at $6,000. It's expensive bagel, man. Inflation. Likely at 4.5. Some decent interest for me since he's a good tight end. The volume's not great, but he sees about 4 or 5 targets a game, and he's a pretty darn good tight end and a pretty good offense. Other than that, if you really need a cheap running back, Reese White and Shamari Jones, they each have 18 rush attempts in their last 2 games. They do get involved in the offense, and in the game where they're probably coasting, they probably don't want to kill Maribel, slamming him the ball 30 times. I guess you could do worse. All right, as far as Troy, I won't spend too much time because I'm not going to have a ton of ownership. I will say they have a lot of guys who are decently interesting, but none that are super exciting. I do think Watson is too cheap. Gunnar Watson, their quarterback, at 5.6. Coastal does have a good defense, but they are a little bit more vulnerable to the run, where they're giving up 142 yards per game and 4.2 yards per carry. However, if you just look at it from a macro perspective, they're only allowing 16.8 points per game, and they didn't really give up much to BYU last game out, and BYU has a fantastic aerial assault. So you could do worse than Watson as your punt play, but again, there's just not a fantastic punt play. They all have warts. Anyway, at running back, Vidal probably will be my most owned guy on Troy, which I won't have much, but he has 13 catches through the air. In his last 2 games, he's taken over as the starting running back and has really shined with it. He has 52 touches in his last 2 games. So I think at 5.2, you could definitely do worse if you need a running back. Other than that, the wide receivers, again, I think as a one-off, Geiger, I believe, is their most targeted guy, but he's really not a big play threat. He does see a decent amount of targets, though, at 4.9. If you need a lineup filler, you could do worse. I think Reggie Todd is too cheap. Todd and McLean are about equal in wide receiving work. I'm not really sure why McLean is more expensive. Okay, moving on. North Carolina versus Miami, a game you should have some interest in. Since the total's at 67.5, this is a very good game. It's definitely the game I'm looking forward to most. I would say in a vacuum, I do think North Carolina is a better football team. But I am a little bit worried, this being the last game of the year and UNC not really having much to play for and coming off, I guess they're not coming off a loss because they played Western Carolina last week, but they lost to Notre Dame the week before. And this being in Miami, although not having a full crowd, it's in Florida, so who knows what the hell they're doing there. I don't have a great feeling about it, so I'll say that. I trust UNC a little bit more than I would trust Miami. I think they're both good, though. I think this is a good matchup. Anyway, okay. You should know the North Carolina guys by now. Sam Howell is fine. The workload isn't exactly what you'd like to see. You are kind of relying on this offense being ultra efficient, which they have been for most of the year. They do get a decent test against Miami. Decent. Maybe not be quite as good of a Miami defense as you've seen in the past, but they have been getting much better as the year have gone on. That's why I'm a little bit worried. They allowed 0 points to Duke last week. They beat Duke 48-0. I think they're getting better as the year has gone on. At the beginning of the year, they were really vulnerable to the rush, and now I believe their middle linebackers out, McLeod, but they have some really talented defensive ends, and they've kind of put it together. They're getting better. On the year as a whole, they're giving up 3.9 yards per rush and 5 yards per play. As far as the running back, I do think Javonte Williams is a little too cheap at $7,000. I do kind of want to pay up and get him there. But he had, 3 carries last game? I know it was against Western Carolina, which is interesting. But you see before that, 11 carries, 13 carries, 12 carries. I think it's too cheap. I don't think he should be cheaper than Michael Carter. If anything, they should be even. For most of the year, that was flip-flopped, and Carter was cheaper, so I played him every now and then. But I think Williams has the more touchdown upside, so I'll say that. I think he's okay. More on that Miami defense. They allowed only 177 yards of offense to Duke. I know Duke's not great, but that's really impressive. They are ranked number 1 in the ACC in pass yards allowed per attempt. However, big asterisk to that number, their star cornerback. From everything I've read, and I haven't watched Miami in a few weeks, but last I watched, this was the case. Al Blades was their star corner, and the other corners kind of struggled in coverage. Now Al Blades is out for the season. So where does that leave this pass defense? I'm not sure. I don't want to say they're bad defense or anything, but that's certainly a big loss to have, which means there's no reason De'Ami Brown, top wide receiver for UNC, should be 6.6K. I think just based on price alone, I do have to play him. He has been very hit or miss, has had some big games, and has had some really awful games. You see it there, 3.9 points, 4.5 points. With 3.9 points at Western Carolina, that was a blowout. He probably wasn't even on the field very much. The Duke one was a little bit inexplainable. So I'll have some De'Ami Brown. He'll be my most owned guy in this game. Daz Newsome at 6.3. I have said in the past, he's dead to me after putting up bagel upon bagel in the early going. I guess they weren't technically bagels, but they were close enough to it for me to lose my appetite in Daz Newsome. However, he's been on a roll ever since I stopped playing him. Of course, he's been on a roll. 6 catches, 10 catches, 6 catches, 6 catches. They are going to him more, so I think he's fine. I like De'Ami Brown more, but Newsome's fine. Other than that, Bo Corrales is out for the year. If you're looking for anyone behind them, it's definitely nobody's going to get consistent targets. I would think the guy you would go to, so Coffrey Brown at 6.6, or 3.6, De'Ami's brother, has looked good, but he almost never gets the ball, so you'd be hoping on a big play or two. Emery Simmons is the guy who's on the field the most. He had that spectacular catch against Notre Dame. However, he only had 2 catches in that one for 11 yards, so not really sure how much you can rely on him. If you really need a cheap guy, I'll probably play some of them at 3.4, sure, in a game with 67 implied points total. Okay, as far as Miami, you kind of know the guys. I'm not going to go over them much. I think they're fine. UNC's defense is okay. You can move the ball on them. They've allowed 5.7 yards per play, and they are worse against the pass. I think King's a little too expensive for me to get to, but I really can't talk you out of him because he has a decent ceiling with a high pace and possibly a close, high-scoring game, possibly back and forth, and he does run the ball as well, so I like his floor. So I won't talk you off. Maybe I'll get there. You could have some game stacks. I'm not sure I'll have a game stack, a full game stack on pretty much any of these. I'll have some games where I'll have maybe a mini stack. It's usually kind of how I like to attack it anyway, and that might be what I do here. His pass catchers, Mike Harley is probably too expensive for me to get to. Him and Brevin Jordan are the top guys. They've been really inconsistent. At first, they didn't throw the wide receivers at all this year, but they have been over the last 4 weeks or so. Some of that coincided with Brevin Jordan being back. Brevin Jordan is back. He did see 6 targets last game. He's one of the better tight ends in college football, very athletic. I think at 5,000, I will have some Brevin Jordan. So those guys are the top 2 guys. I don't know if I'd say they're priced appropriately because Mike Harley's priced too high and Jordan's probably a little bit too low, but I think that's, as far as workload, probably appropriate. D. Wiggins is hit or miss at 4.6. You have to look at him. He seems too cheap. I don't really love playing him. He had 2 big games and really hasn't done much outside of that. So he's very risky, a little bit more risky than I usually like to take on. But if you're playing tournaments and you're playing 150 lineups, you should definitely have a few shares of D. Wiggins. Other than that, it gets real dicey. Will Mallory is a very good tight end at 3.3. His workload's going to go down now that Brevin Jordan is back, however. Okay. I don't play Miami running backs. Cameron Harris at 6.7 is probably decent. You could consider him. I just don't really love playing Miami running backs, and the workload hasn't been great. He was benched earlier in the year. Now apparently he's back. I don't know. Miami running backs, they're all always supposed to be 5 stars, and they're always supposed to be the next hot shit, and they're never really all that good. So I've seen people buy the hype too much, so he's fine. He's whatever. I don't hate him. Not hating on the young man. All right. Wisconsin versus Iowa. This is pretty much an Army versus Navy situation. Total's around 44. I won't really spend much time on it. I think if you want to be... So those are games where if you want to be super contrarian, that's obviously the ones you're going to play because no one else is going to be playing them. But anyway, at running back, Berger. I played a lot of him last week. He wasn't great. I'll probably play some of him at 5.4. I do just think he's too cheap as a Wisconsin running back who has seen 15 carries in each of his last 3 games, and he's averaged 5.8 yards per rush or better in all 3 of those games. So he's bound to have a good game eventually for Wisconsin. But, I mean, this Wisconsin team, the offense stinks. They're just not good. So if you're thinking they're the Wisconsin of old, you're wrong. Although, have they completely fallen off a cliff? It's a weird year, and they've missed a lot of games, I'm sure. I would think they'd come on strong at the end of the year, but I mean, the year's pretty much over. I don't really know what they're playing for at this point. So that's why this slate is hard to tell. In a weird year with some teams are opting out of bowl games, a lot of players are opting out, a lot of coaches are just dead men walking at this point. It's really tough to tell some of the motivations here. So if I have not a great feeling about it, I stay away. Now I say that as a guy who wanted to bet Texas last week, -7. I thought that was like the craziest line ever against Kansas State, and I couldn't do it because I thought Texas might be quitting. Well, Texas didn't quit. They scored, 69 points. So I guess it's just a be cautious thing I'm throwing out there. It's not necessarily a run and avoid, but be cautious. Ferguson, the tight end for Wisconsin, has seen 19 targets in his last 2, so at 5.4, I guess he could do worse. The receiving options for Iowa is the only place I would look. You could play Goodson. He sees a lot of rushes. He's a very good running back, but you see there, Wisconsin's rush defense is an absolute beast. They're allowing under 100 rush yards per game. Laporta, very good tight end. Smith, decent, and Smith-Marset. These are their top 3 guys, and they all see decent targets, but they see 6 per game. I think Smith-Marset has the most home run upside, but he's also the most expensive, so whatever. If you absolutely need somebody in that price range, I guess those guys are decent. Michigan State versus Penn State. This is another one I'm going to pretty much skip. As far as the wide receivers go, Reed and Naylor are the top 2 guys. It's very neck and neck. It's pretty much splitting hairs. I guess you could go the cheaper one. It's been really hard for me to tell who's going to have the big game between these 2, and neither one of them have been super consistent. However, Reed has double-digit DraftKings points in his last 3 straight, so I guess he would be the more consistent guy if I need something. Penn State. Sean Clifford is playing a bad Michigan State team. I think he's supposed to start, but he has not been good when he starts. He does have some dual threat ability. 6.4. If he was 6,000, I'd probably play some of him, but I don't know. As far as the running backs, Devin Ford at 4.9. I might actually play some Devin Ford here. Saw 11 carries last game. He came back. And Kayvon Lee, the freshman, he was their best rusher. He had 15 carries for 99 yards, but he did leave in the 4th quarter and is questionable. So especially if he misses, I think I'm going to have some Ford ownership because Isaiah Holmes behind them hasn't really done much. The wide receivers, I think you have some good prices here. I am mildly intrigued. Washington and Dotson are the clear top 2 guys because Pat Freiermuth has opted out for the year. I think he opted out. I don't think it was an injury. Hard to keep track at this point. It's been a wild, crazy year. So these guys are the top 2. Parker Washington did absolutely nothing last game, and he's been pretty inconsistent, but I think he has a decent workload and he's playing a bad team. He could do worse at 4.4. Certainly could do worse. I will have some ownership. Jahan Dotson is their number one guy. Had a very hot start, but he has had 3 bad games in his last 4. But look at that. 2 30 burgers and a 40 burger thrown in there. So at 6.5, he should probably be more expensive. I guess I see why he's not, because he likes to throw up duds. But I'll have some ownership on Penn State. Okay, Houston versus Memphis. This is one that you should be interested in. Probably a lot of people will be interested in. Maybe not as many as normal since it is a group of 5 game. But both teams are allowing 6 yards per play, over 6 yards per play. 2 very suspect defenses. Looking at Houston, they're going against a Memphis defense that's allowing, they're the number 104 defense in total yardage. They're allowing 306 pass yards per game, so worse against the pass. That means I'm going to have some Clayton Tune on Houston. He should be more expensive. He's not 7.5, he's 7.8, right? 7.8. He's pretty boom or bust, I guess you could say. He has 47 fantasy points last game with 120 rushing yards and 2 TDs. He does have some rushing ability. He hasn't really shown it in many games this year, so it was nice to see him show it. He's a very good athlete, but you know, the rushing stats haven't always been there in his college career. It's nice to see he's running a little bit. If you're pairing him with anybody, Stevenson's their top guy, but he's questionable. I'm really not sure he's going to play. I have a feeling he's not, but more of a hunch than anything. Haven't really gotten much news out of this program. So if he does play, he's fine. If he doesn't, Corbin is the top guy behind him. I don't love it because I believe he has a high of only 4 catches this year. He just doesn't have a great workload. However, with Stevenson out, he had 14 targets over his last 2 games, whereas Dell only had 9. So those are probably the top 2 guys, with Corbin seeing slightly more targets. I'm probably going to have more Dell just because of the price. Dell is a speedster. He is very risky. I won't get carried away since the targets aren't fantastic. I'd like to see more targets, but against a bad defense with opportunity and game-breaking home run threat speed, I'll have some Dell. Nathan Dell at 4.3. Behind that, Bradley's probably the next guy up, but he sounds like he's out. So you could throw a dart on Bryson Smith, I believe. They, at one point in time, thought he was going to be the next quarterback there. Maybe I'm confusing him with somebody else. I know they like to do that, like Derek King kind of thing. Started out kind of playing wide receiver, and they mixed him in there at quarterback. So Bryson Smith is a pretty good athlete at 3.8. Okay, anyway, too much time. I'm not interested in their running backs, but it's a high-scoring game, so you could do worse. As far as the same thing for Memphis. I'm not really interested in playing the running backs. Sounds like Rodriguez-Clark is probably going to play, but he's banged up, so I don't know if I want to trust him. I think I would trust him at 5.7 in a matchup like this, but with the health, I don't know. This Houston defense is beatable. They're the number 89 pass defense in the country. On total, they allow 6.1 yards per play. They can definitely be beat by the rush as well, allowing 189 rush yards per game. Brady White is fine at 8.6. Tune is cheaper in this game, which means I'll just naturally have more Tune ownership. I'm worried about this Memphis team, though. You know, I played a decent amount of them in FanDuel against a very bad Tulane pass defense last week, and they just shit the bed. They shit the bed against Navy before that, I believe. And if that was the order of the games, but I think those were the last 2 games. And it looks like crap in both of them. They seem like a team that's pretty much quit. I don't bet on either of these teams because I think Dana Holgorsen is not a good coach whatsoever. I think he's the most overrated, overhyped. I was amazed to see people still hyping him in the year 2020, Dana Holgorsen, after he just tanked in college football. Anyway, so kind of a nasty game, but when you have these 2 teams with 2 bad defenses, you have to have some ownership. Anyway, Calvin Austin at 7.9. I mean, he's the second highest priced wide receiver on the slate, and I think it's for good reason. He did see 16 targets last game, and he has gone over 100 yards in 6 of his last 7 games. So since Devontae Coxie opted out, he's really their true alpha in a good matchup. I'll have some ownership interest here. Other than that, Sean Dykes, their tight end at 5.7K. His targets have been very inconsistent, mostly trending down. So he's okay at 5.7 in a good matchup, but I will definitely have more Taj Washington. I believe he's a freshman. He's kind of a home run threat guy. At 5.1, I think he's too cheap. He's gone over 100 yards twice. this year, which I'd like to see him do that a little bit more. But he did see 8 targets last game. I do think he's definitely their number 2 guy, and he should be more expensive, so I'll have a decent amount of dollars for Washington. Washington, Oregon has been nixed, which is okay because I wasn't really going to play it anyway. I was really looking forward to watching it. As a Ducks fan, I really enjoy Washington versus Oregon every year. It's always a sneaky game to watch. Last year's was incredible. Nobody cares because it's on the West Coast, and a bunch of dumb East Coast idiots are mainly the college football elite nowadays. So I'm just kidding. Just a dumb joke. Don't hate me if you're on the East Coast. The College Football Breakdown Show apologizes. Anyway, enough of digging my own grave. Duke versus Florida State. This is interesting. I don't want to trust this game too much because you have 2 not very good teams, but you have 2 bad defenses. So I am all ears. Duke, I just mentioned they scored 170 points last. Had 170 points. No, they did not. 170 yards last week. Not great. 0 points. Not great. But they are playing a Florida State defense. If this is a bounce back spot, if there ever was one, it's this. Florida State is allowing 464 yards per game. They're allowing 6.6 yards per play, which is god-awful. About as bad as you can possibly get if you're not UMass. Actually, I want to check UMass and see what their defensive numbers are. Probably not far off Florida State. Anyway, they're bad. They allow 270 pass yards per game and 193 rush yards per game at a 5.2 yards per carry clip. So it's tough to play Duke this week. Very, very tough. And Chase Bryce really hasn't had a good fantasy game in eons, or pretty much ever. And he loves throwing interceptions. Just loves it. I think Duke, off the top of my head, I think they're 126th in the turnover margin on the year, mainly due to Bryce. So I think if I'm playing them, their running backs are fine, but the pricing, I do think Durant has been seeing more workload. I think he has more carries than Jackson in each of his last 4 games, and he has been more effective. 6.4, I wish he was a little cheaper in a game where, they're a bad team. Maybe they're going to be playing from behind. Who knows in this one? Who knows who's motivated? David Cutcliffe's a good coach, but at a certain point, motivation doesn't always make sense. It doesn't just mean you have a good coach. It's tough to tell in college football, and trust me, I try to cover it. And it's tough to tell. So anyway, I think they're both fine. I think Jackson's probably too cheap at 4.7, but I'm really not that interested in owning much of him since he's been trending downwards. He could definitely do worse at 4.4, however. And if I'm playing a receiver, I'm going to look to Jalen Calhoun. Not going to have a ton of him. He really doesn't have much upside. But he does see a fair amount of workload. He has 4 or more catches in 5 straight games, and he has 18 targets in his last 2 games. So, hey. Okay, Florida State, I'm going to have ownership in Florida State. Sounds crazy. Wide receiver position, not really. Wilson's the top guy, but their passing game isn't very good. However, they can run the ball. Kind of. Mainly when Travis is at quarterback, and Travis should be at quarterback here. They're playing a Duke team that's allowing 203 rush yards per game, 4.8 yards per carry. They're allowing 6.1 yards per play in total, 437 total yards per game. And they've been shit lately. In their last 3 games, they're on a 3-game losing streak. And in that span, they've allowed 53.3 points per game. So I'm interested in Florida State. I will definitely play Jordan Travis. He's not a very good thrower of the football at all, but he can throw the ball a little bit. He's gotten over 200 yards a few times, gotten close. Another, so there's that. But he's mainly a runner. He can barely complete 50% of his passes. He can't really throw more than 1 touchdown per game, so the upside's not fantastic. But against this bad of a defense, I know they're missing some of their top corners, and I'm not really sure what's going on with Duke, to be honest. I'm not paying that close of attention, but something's happening. That's obvious. Travis does have 85 rushes for 472 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground, and he's been in and out of the lineup and hasn't played a full complement of games. So I'm definitely going to have some Travis as my second quarterback in lineups. If you're not interested in Travis, if he scares you that he can't throw the football, okay. I would probably be interested in Corbin in that matter then. Their running back, Jashawn Corbin, Texas A&M transfer, pretty good running back. He's been splitting carries with LaDamian Webb. However, LaDamian Webb should be out for this game. I believe he's out. I would double check that. Haven't seen any news lately. Let me see if there's a note on DraftKings. That'll help me. Oh yeah, not returning to the team in January. So we're still in December, right? Yeah. Anyway, so behind that, Tofili has been seeing some carries, but he didn't see a carry last week. He'll probably see more now that Webb's out at 3.5. He could do worse as a punt. But Jashawn Corbin at 5.5, I mean, he saw 14 carries last week. While Travis does eat into his workload a little bit, one of these guys, or both of them, should have a good game against this Duke defense. All right, boys, that's the slate. Positional overview. I'll probably do more in my article as far as how I'm really looking at roster construction. There's never one right way to do roster construction, but if you're curious, just kind of how I'm viewing the slates. You know, I've been paying down at running back and it's been working. I think I'm going to do that in about half my lineups. There's no running back I love to pay up for here. So I'm probably going to kind of be paying down, Zamir White at 6.8. Maybe Javonte Williams. Definitely have some Beal Smith. Maybe Beal Smith's my most owned running back. We'll see. You always think you are going to own these guys, and it depends on roster construction. But Durant, yeah. So yeah, I'll probably be. I think there's value at the running back position this week. Smith, you have to have him in some lineups, but he's so expensive. I don't really think he's a must play, but he's not far off. That's a game Alabama might call off the horses, call off the dogs, rein in the horses. That's the phrase. A little bit against Arkansas, I would imagine. Maybe not. They might still score 60. Who the hell knows? They're amazing. Anyway, there's a lot of wide receivers. I'll have ownership interest. I tried to point out the prices I liked as I went along. There's no one guy I'm married to so far. I'll probably have a lot of De'Ami Brown, a lot of Taj Washington, a lot of Des Fitzpatrick, and anybody else I mentioned, Roberson, maybe Green on Wake Forest. But yeah, quarterback. There's definitely a lot of cheaper quarterbacks. I don't really love any of them. I guess Vedral. Maybe Tyler if he starts, but I'm probably not going to punt that much. Probably if I pay down, I'm going to have to pay up for my second quarterback, Hartman at 6.8, Travis at 7.1, maybe Baby Tua at 7.1. He's not my favorite, but if you like him, by all means. I'd probably go in that range for my second quarterback. And then first quarterback, I'm going to pay up. I'll probably have a decent amount of tune. And then anybody else I mentioned, there's a lot of good options in there. I don't know if a lot of good options. Yeah, there's a lot of good options. Okay. As far as bets, definitely been making more money this year off DraftKings and FanDuel than I have on bets. But if you're interested in, I spend a lot of time looking at these games. So if you're curious what I'm playing, Georgia minus 13, as mentioned earlier. Rutgers plus 7.5 with a little sprinkle on the money line, as mentioned earlier. Louisiana Tech plus 21.5 playing TCU. I don't think TCU should be favored by that much over anybody. They're not very good. They have problems, and they're not great at scoring the ball usually. And Louisiana Tech, while it's been a pretty down year, they started to play a little bit better lately. And Skip Holtz is a very, very good coach as an underdog in a pretty decent sample size, and he's catching 3 touchdowns. So I signed up for that. I also signed up for Illinois plus 14 against Northwestern. I mentioned it last week against Iowa. I said Illinois, they play tough. I think they're pretty well coached under Lovie Smith. I don't think they're a quitting team. They're okay. They're not great, but they're tough and they can run the ball and they could keep it close. And they kept it close for most of the game. I think Iowa ended up winning by 14, but against a Northwestern team that also plays tough, but their offense sucks. Why would you play a team whose offense sucks to cover 14? I don't know. I guess that's something weird going on. I mean, Northwestern's already in the Big Ten championship game, right? So what are they playing for? Style points? I mean, I don't really know if anybody expects them to be in the playoff, so I thought that line was weird. Okay, and then the last thing I played, Stanford, Oregon State over 52. So it must be noted that Oregon State's without their quarterback, Tristan Gebbia, who's not fantastic in his own right. So that's probably the reason for this line. But these are two over teams for me. Their offenses are much better than their defenses for both of these teams. And 52 is way too low of a total for a team where that's the case. So I guess that's probably an overreaction to Jebbia being out. I'm not really sure. So both teams really can't stop the run. I think they're both allowing over 200 rush yards per game, and they can both run the ball themselves. So I signed up. Both teams should be able to move it. All right, that wraps up the slate. At YonkersCFB, thanks for listening to the College Football Breakdown Show, Week 15 DFS picks. Best of luck on all of your action.